And we're live. Welcome, everybody, to our Freedom Fight Expo today. I'm your host, Jason Wilson. Today, we have a wonderful lineup of speakers. But before we get into everything, ladies and gentlemen, just wanted to give you a little history about Freedom Fight Expo and our cause and everything that we're about. So, this idea actually started last year. I got the idea from God to do this expo to help people with different causes. But among the four that we basically specialize in is PTSD, suicidal ideation, anxiety, and depression. Those are the four areas in which I have seen my own family go through, namely my mother. My mother died in 2014 of natural causes. And since then, I have dedicated my professional career to helping people with depression and all of these causes that we are passionate about. Today we have Kaleigh Rogers, Lisa Marree, Tennille Jacobs, April Wyett, Burdette, and Carol Banens. They're going to give you wonderful, wonderful testimonies, inspiration, encouragement. I want you to know that you are not alone in this fight. God is with you. He loves you. We love you. You have a community, and we're excited about this expo. We have our event today, tomorrow, and Sunday. We have a prayer service. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to enjoy yourselves. Uh, Share out the link to this event to anyone that you see in your family, or maybe you know a friend or a colleague that is suffering. This event would not be possible without our sponsors. So we're going to have a word for our sponsor, and then we'll get started. Chasen Forehand is the founder of HR4U Inc. They empower change-driven companies and their leaders to advocate for and uplift their employees with living wages, worth, and well-being.
Do you have your ticket for Friday, September 27th Feed for Good yet? Tickets are available on Zephy, which was chosen because all proceeds go to Transformation Kitchen. Go get your ticket
now. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start with our first speaker for today. That's Kaleigh Rogers. Kaleigh Rogers is a nationally certified trauma therapist who walks alongside others to help their inner light shine bright. She designs rich and unique experiences to heal traumatic stress, get clear about who we are, and live within the body of Christ as loved treasure. Welcome to the stage, Kaleigh.
Good morning, world. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited. Jason, thank you for the beautiful introduction to our sponsors. Those that know me, I don't usually sound like this. I lost my voice completely in the last 2 days. And boy, you better believe it. We've been praying and praying and praying. So we get like Batman voice today. It'll make it very interesting and fun. I'm so thankful I get to go first, because what I'm talking about is the power of faithful prayer, even in the most life-threatening situations. I get to tell more of my story, the story of my brother. The bond of brother and sister is very strong. However, evil forces in the world will try and break that bond and will try and keep us down and separated. So you'll get to hear some real life stuff. Now, trigger warning, life gets really hard. So some of the things I'm going to talk about can be emotionally charged. They can resonate with your life or your family's life. So before we do anything, I just ask you, root yourself in your feet, recognize where you're standing, sitting, or laying down, wiggle your toes, welcome in a deep breath from the ground up, and release it. Welcome in another deep breath and release it. Heavenly Father, we ask that anyone in this audience, whatever it is they need to hear, whatever it is they need to feel, to know that they matter and that they're loved by you, and to give them all the wisdom and treasure they need to keep moving forward in their life. Lord, we just ask that happen. And Lord, we thank you for these really great gifts. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. All right. So as I'm working to pull up on my screen, I want to show you a picture, but I want to tell you the power of prayer is so necessary. Prayer can look like just what we did. It's just an honest conversation with God. I don't see it because it's not a Chrome tab. I may have to like share it later. But it's a picture of me, my brother, and our other sibling. And it's just us as kids, right? So you look back and you go, those were some happy times. We got to laugh and smile and play. And unfortunately, life dealt my family a lot of really hard hands, different kinds of trauma and dysfunctions. And we're a family that loves each other, but we experienced a lot of hurt and a lot of heartache. So as we move forward, I'm 6 years older than my brother. I'm the oldest and he's the youngest. You're probably already like, oh, that starting to make a little bit of sense. Birth order matters. But as we moved along, one of the ways I navigated PTSD and trauma was workaholism. I would busy myself. If I kept myself busy enough, I was productive and I was strong and I didn't have to deal with feelings. Now, this is all an underlying script. This wasn't something that I just chose one day and was like, I'm 12 years old, I'm just going to be busy all the time. But it's one of these insidious ways that trauma gets a hold of us and our lives. My brother, on the other hand, as a teenager, he found his way into addiction, a different form of addiction, so drug addiction. Pretty quickly, it escalated from polysubstance use to heroin addiction. And the first we knew of it was an overdose where he clinically died and was revived back with Narcan. Hallelujah, Narcan, and those two angel people that came and helped pull him into an urgent care. But it was a period of time that was really, really scary. We didn't know if my brother was going to make it or not. Knowing that I don't have control over this situation, I can't control his decisions, his life. I prayed every single day. Now, I had walked with the Lord since I was 4 years old. But as life goes, sometimes we get off the path a little bit. We're with him, but we're not really with him all the time. But I ran straight into Jesus's arms and he was there for me. And in all of this pain and struggle, we ended up sitting on the couch of our living room, and it was me, my parents, both of my siblings, and it was the day of my dad's baptism, and we're sitting with my brother, and we'd already went through the overdose and other things, and my brother was active in his addiction. We never knew how things were going to go. We were sitting in the living room together as a family having a mini intervention, which, by the way, I don't recommend unless you have some actual guidance in doing one. So we're having this intervention, and my brother wasn't very emotional at this time. In his addiction, there was a lot of anger and stress, but he started to cry. And in my mind, I'm like, oh, he understands. And he asked to go to his room, went to his room. He's a teenager at this time. And about 15 minutes go by, my mom goes to check on him, and he's gone. He climbed out his window. And we immediately knew something wasn't good. So we all dispersed. We call the police. We check the neighborhood. We go to friends' houses. Hours go by. We're searching everywhere. And around this time, we're praying and we're praying and we're praying. Lord, keep him safe. Lord, show us the way. Lord, bring him back home. And a couple hours is about midnight. My mom's on the phone with his girlfriend, and his girlfriend gives us the sad news that he did call her and said he was going to kill himself, and then said he was going to destroy his phone so no one could track him. And that's what he did. And she didn't know where he was or any of the other details. But my mom gets off the phone, and it was as if like a vision comes in her mind. And she comes to me and she says, Kaleigh, we're in the driveway with the police. She goes, Kaleigh, I need you to go to the end of the street, and I need you to get in the backyard. That's where he is. I just know it. That's where he is. And I look at her, and I look at the police, and they're like, ma'am, no, you shouldn't break and enter onto someone's property. But my mom is she's like, no, there's something to this. So I go down the end of the street, and I'm terrified. Not only is all this traumatic stress in my own body, but I'm potentially breaking and entering into someone's backyard, and I have no idea what I'm getting into. So I chicken out. I knock on the door, I call, try and get in the backyard. It's locked. Can't get there. So I come back home, and I'm like, Mom, I just don't know. And she goes, Kaleigh, you have to get in the backyard. You go now. So I go again. I bring one of my brother's friends with me. They lift me up on a trash can. I get over the fence, and I immediately could feel that there was a presence that didn't want me there. And I was petrified. petrified coming around the corner. But I come around the corner and there's a dark figure sitting in a chair under the patio. Couldn't see who it was. So I just start calling my brother's name. Mikey, is it you? Mikey, is it you? Mikey, is it you? And very quietly, he goes, yeah, it's me. I run over and it was dark, so I couldn't see all the details, but he had tried to end his life. He had slit his throat and his arms. He was too weak to go anywhere. And looking back in conversation, he said, he wondered if maybe he had made a mistake. What if he had been able to get up and go, but he was too weak at the time to really go anywhere. So I show up, the cops come, and my family comes, and the whole scene kind of continues. He isn't treated super well. Some challenges happen through that. He's taken to the ER. He gets lots of stitches. Some aren't stitches, but they are like liquid skin Band-Aids almost, like skin glue. And all through this, my terror is really high. But pretty soon after, in the coming weeks, I felt absolutely nothing. Like, I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel happy. There was lingering guilt of not feeling any feelings, but I felt absolutely nothing. At this time, I knew nothing of PTSD. So I first sought a therapist, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, I must be the most terrible sister that exists because I feel nothing. This has happened. My brother nearly died. I've seen all of this, and yet I feel nothing. And she goes, oh, honey, it's normal after a traumatic event to feel numb. This is the shock response. This is the brain. This is the body. And it was in one sentence, my life changed because I knew I wasn't broken. I knew that my body and my mind and my spirit were responding to something it should never have to respond to. And it was doing the best that it could. So in the coming years and the therapies I received for PTSD, one primary one that helped me tremendously was called thought field therapy. So thought is in your mind, field is in the magnetic field, and therapy. I really love Lisa's talk because the body has to be incorporated. It holds the memories, it holds the stress, and it will stay on this loop of hypervigilance and fear and intrusive thoughts and memories and flashbacks and suicidal thoughts, all the things. It'll keep playing and playing and playing until it's disrupted and given a new pathway. So thought field therapy just used the acupressure points on my body, the actual thought fields, and allowed me to come back to a sense of safety. No longer did I need to dissociate. No longer did I need to be the workaholic that I was. I could set down my own addiction. I'd also like to share with you, as I've continued to heal, I've needed more holistic therapies to help me move forward in my life. One of those has been equine therapy. So some of it is, yes, the grooming and the brushing and the being present, but it's also been witnessing horses that have experienced anxiety and trauma walk through their own healing process, to be able to get in the round pen with a horse and work out my struggles and to practice actually being present. And the other last bit of medicine I want to share with you has been nature. I can't tell you how many times in my life I felt completely at peace in my mind, my body, my spirit. But the river is one of those places where I can kayak, I can swim, I can paddleboard. And it's almost as if it isn't almost as if, it is as if I can connect more with my creator. I can connect more with the natural environment that allows my body to go, I am safe. I don't have to freak out. I don't have to be scared anymore. So from the girl that I was, full-blown in workaholism, active PTSD through most of my lifetime, I'm now a certified trauma therapist. I've been doing that over 10 years. I tell you that to let you know that no matter what your story is, no matter what you're going through, God can make miracles happen. And he creates a pathway for you that is unique to you. And he will give you these divine promptings that can be very strange sometimes, just like get in the backyard of a random house and then something happens. Or me, you've got to leave here to get over there. We look back to scripture, and in Genesis, Abraham is told by God, leave this city that you live in. You're going to live in tents the rest of your life and go to this strange land. And he was obedient. He was obedient. And if he hadn't, we wouldn't have a lot of the things in that place of the world of Israel that actually exist. So the message is, pay attention to the promptings. Don't forget about powerful prayer. Sometimes God says no to things but Romans 8:28, he's always working things for the good for those who love him. You're probably wondering, where is my brother now? Because man, did he go through it. Not only heroin addiction, a suicide attempt, an overdose, and many other things. Is he okay? I am so happy and proud to tell you that my brother is the most beautiful soul that exists. He recently got married to a lovely woman and has a son. He has a family, and he also works in a detox center, and he loves on those men and women that society would cast aside. He encourages them, he fills them, he holds them accountable, and he also makes them laugh because he is such a jokester. I love my brother and I love my family. I love that I've been able to come as far as I have. I'm just one story, but I'm here to tell you it's possible with yours too. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Jason, for letting me get the message out, even with my voice and even with the internet issues. And I just hope and pray whoever is listening that you are taking this message as truth and holding it together. Thank you.
Lisa Marree is a holistic business mentor and leadership coach. Lisa taps into the personal and professional challenges to map the healing process necessary for growth, cultivating confidence, success, and fulfillment. Welcome to the stage, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Jason, and the sponsors for inviting me onto the show today. I'm going to share just a little bit about my background and my own personal transformation and what has led me on the path of doing what I do, and just give you a very different angle into rewiring, basically the building resilience and rewiring, recoding the system to release yourself from that PTSD grip. And that's my own personal experience. And I'd like to just delve back to my very humble beginnings. As a child, my mother had very violent psychiatric illness. So my sister and I lived absolute physical violence and emotional manipulation, blackmail, and witnessed many, many horrible violent attacks, and was on the receiving end of that as well. And I do want to give a disclaimer just before I keep going, is that the information that I have today is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any forms of trauma or PTSD. And some of the things that I will be talking about may also be a little bit triggering for people. So it's very important to just be aware of your body right now and be very present. And as Kaleigh did before we lost her connection, is that, ground yourself, feel your feet on the ground, your seat in the chair, take a couple of nice deep breaths and just be present in your body. And this is really very much focused on where I'll be going in my little talk. I really want to plant the seeds of hope and just help people understand that we know that your past does not define your future, because millions of people have been able to transform. But how do you actually break that grip of what's going on in your body and all of that trauma that is actually in there, and the subconscious programming that's running in the background, which is really driving the show. I lived my childhood in survival. Every single day was unpredictable and fear, and it led to me having catastrophic health problems. It led me to having a number of emotional problems. I had eating disorders. I contemplated suicide as a young adult. I was a runaway teen in fear of my life. And so I was also, deep down, there was an inner knowing. There was something within me just kept driving me forward, understanding that my current reality was not the real world out there. And so I was forever in the pursuit of happiness and trying to seek answers. And some people call it faith, some people call it universal prayer. So whatever it is for you is perfectly okay. And I want you to know that you are a powerful creator being in a body, in this physical humanness that experiences all sorts of feelings, poor health, joy, love. So we go through all of these different cycles of life. And I had a couple of abusive marriages because I was actually, my set point was being on the receiving end of abuse. And so even though I didn't like that, I seemed to be attracted into that kind of relationship. And on the flip side, so did my sister. Tragically, it's actually almost 12 months. It'll be in 2 weeks' time that she actually took her life. And so we can have the darkness in us and the shadow in us and still be able to move forward. Having said that, I do use props. I have been known online to have props, and I want to introduce you to Barry the brain. Basically, we are not our brain. It's a piece of hardware, literally, and it's what is running in the background. You know, I've got my phone, for example. This is Android, and there's iPhone. There's actually a software program running in the background inside the hardware. The phone is the hardware. And so what we do know in neuroscience, because I have a medical science background, I have a military background, I have a leadership development background, and I've spent the last 20 years in holistic health as well. So I have the best of both worlds. I have Western medicine and knowledge of the complexities of the brain, and I also have a deep spiritual connection to the Eastern philosophy and way of life and the healing arts. And so the powerful fusion of that is understanding that what I said a couple of minutes ago is that we're a very powerful creator being in a human body. And so we have up to about 70,000 thoughts a day, and 90% of those are on a redundant loop of the subconscious programming. And what is taking on a bit of a unique angle is that anxiety, depression, panic, all kinds of emotions like that, that is a state that our body is in. Our thoughts are basically not creating the anxiety or the panic or the depression. It's actually from the original traumas or the ongoing chronic stress from ongoing trauma that people are suffering, that's keeping the body in a state of stress. Like the mechanisms of stress have been turned on and they're unstuck. So they're at a position where the body's in a constant fight, flight, or freeze. And so what I'd like to do is have a little bit of a drawing here, and only a very small screen, so I'm going to have to try and navigate it. I'll speak of a couple of quotes first that really is in line with what I'm saying, but these are from such a long time ago. And what I do know, the way to be in control of your life is to create it. However, as Ralph Waldo Emerson said many, many years ago, is a man is what he thinks about all day long. And if we even go back to the 1900s, the 1800s, Nikola Tesla, he said, if you want to find the secrets to the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And he was a physicist. He was also really tinkering on the understanding of quantum science. And when you talk about quantum science, it just means the minuscule things. The quantum is a measure. It's a tiny, tiny measure that we can't see, of course. And so when we look at it from the perspective of medical science, that we are literally, because my job was to look down the microscope to diagnose disease for doctors in the laboratory. And so when we look at cells and look inside the cells and then look inside the energy network of the cells, it's literally just vibrating energy at the smallest atomic level. And so we are just vibrating energy. And therein lies what we are now finding in neuroscience of our emotional state is vibrating at a particular frequency. And we know we can measure the body. It has an electromagnetic field. We can measure the brain using an EEG. We can measure the heart doing an ECG. So these things are measurable, which is really great because now we can understand that what the Eastern philosophies have been speaking about for a long time, science is now starting to say, wow, you know, there's actually some fact behind that. So that's pretty cool. And I just before I go to my drawing, the world of epigenetics, we have the wonderful brains from Dr. Bruce Lipton, who is basically the father of stem cell biology. And he basically said that the thoughts, whether we have negative or positive, determine our biology. And that 95% of all chronic diseases, without exception, has been scientifically proven to be caused by stress and low frequency lifestyle. There is no more than 5% that is actually created by our genes in disease. And so then when we go into the world of mental illness, we know that the people have, I'm speaking from my own experience, is that we become stuck in a loop of an emotional roller coaster, and various stimuli create various triggers in our system, which then gives us that rush of that feeling, whether it be panic or fear or whatever's going on in your body. It could be feeling paranoid, it could be guilt, it could be shame, all of these emotions. And so these are on a chronic stress response. What is now being found in neuroscience and psychology is that our body is becoming addicted to the hormones of stress. And so it's an emotional addictive cycle. And therefore, we know that we can reprogram the subconscious to then be able to change our belief systems and then what's happening in our body. And we do know that trauma remains stuck in our body. So how do we actually release that? I'm just going to change my screen again for a moment. Okay, so if we come to my little drawing here, this is basically, if we look at the energy centers from the Eastern perspective, I'm talking about the chakra system. And within this is a very crude drawing of what's called the Hawkins funnel. And this was basically a frequency scale that could determine the emotions going on through, obviously, there were lots of people being connected to machines. And so they could actually determine that low vibration, about 70% of the people who were connected to the apparatus were vibrating at the frequency of fear, which is around a frequency of 100. And as we move up the scale, we've got guilt, we've got shame, and all of these as well are correlating with a particular energy center in our body. And we've got grief, sadness. I don't know if this is going backwards. It could be going backwards here. Grief, sadness, and anger. And of course, this is in line with our heart. We've got the other higher chakras, which down here is suffering in the lower levels. This is getting by. And this is, of course, flow up here. And so when we take the Eastern and the Western philosophies and put them together, we can actually really make a lot of connection to say, okay, well, we know that the person is stuck in this position. And so how do we go about helping that person rewire their thoughts, feelings, emotions? Because our thoughts create our feelings, which create our emotions, which then drive our actions. And when that's constantly on that cycle, we are basically creating our personality. And it's now becoming very well known of what I was saying a few minutes ago, is that it becomes an emotional addiction to the hormones of stress. And I'm going to, because anxiety is emotion, and that turned on constantly creates nervous system dysregulation. So the normal hemostasis is knocked out of whack. And so it doesn't know how to get out of fight and flight. So when we talk about epigenetics, because I've only got a few minutes left, I'm going to keep it, I try and keep things really simple. Imagine this tennis ball is one of your 100 trillion cells in your body. And if you're a coffee drinker, you may be able to relate, or if you smoke cigarettes, that when you have a moment where you think, oh, I really need a coffee, or, oh gosh, I've got to go and have a cigarette, that is basically on your cells. You've got a little receptor on there going beep, beep, beep. Give me some caffeine, give me some nicotine. And so all of a sudden, you have your caffeine. It's like a little Nerf ball. And so we turn this into the hormones of stress. We've got somebody's system is starting to come down because there's no crisis. And so what happens is the body creates enough stress of saying, I need to have that hormone fix, that the person will have an angry snap, or they will create an argument, or they will, something will happen to trigger that stress response. And then you've got another hormone that says, oh, thank you for that. And so our cells are constantly demanding that it gets the fix of what it's used to flooding its system. The beautiful thing is, from a scientific fact, is that we know around every 90 days we get a completely new cell generation. So all my cells today were not in my body 90 days ago. And it takes 66 days to rewire a new neural pathway. So having said that, looking from a perspective of we can literally rewire our system, obviously working with the nervous system, and a lot of that is done through mindfulness and and reprogramming. We talk about meditation. It could be, by the way, medication is one of these things that people are constantly relying on in their system. So breath work, hypnotherapy, a lot of the healing arts are a wonderful way to bring the nervous system down back to a more regulated state. And that is where we can then put the new programming in, the new subliminal learning, the new rewiring. But we have to understand that these things have to be done consistently, 90 days, 120 days, 6 months, 12 months. It's taken me, because I've had to figure it out all myself, it's taken me probably, I'm in my mid-50s now, the first 35 to 40 years of my life of not being a train wreck to start to sort this out. And I was introduced to Eastern philosophy when I was 14. And I think that was one of my biggest saving graces, because I saw that there was something out there that I could follow my quest, my life quest of finding inner peace and happiness. And I have found it, and I am devoting my life to helping people find their higher self and actually work towards that and live with beautiful love, compassion, inner peace, joy, happiness. And thank you so much for this opportunity for me to share a little bit in a very short amount of time. Thank you so much.
Tennille Jacobs is a trauma-informed holistic wellness coach. She delves into the interconnectedness of the biopsychosocial spiritual aspects of health and the power of lunar alignment in deepening our connection with ourselves and the natural world. Welcome to the stage, Tennille.
Wow, what great testimonies of the ladies before me. I'm so excited because a few of the things they spoke about are things that I may be able to expand upon as well from a example perspective. So as some of you know, I was born and raised in Zimbabwe. I immigrated to Canada as a young adult, and throughout my childhood, I witnessed the impact of unaddressed trauma from a societal level, right? So that's what I'll be speaking about today, is how societal trauma can actually impact your personal mental health. So now, because what I saw with this unaddressed trauma was these came from the impact of war, from health crises in the country and other societal traumas, and now living in the West, I realized that there's similar patterns that are prevalent here too. So I put together a little presentation. I'm not sure if you can share it, just to keep me on track. And I hope that you find this talk informative. So I'd love to share your thoughts in any ways of how some of these experiences may resonate with you. Okay, so what I'll be discussing here is just going over a baseline about the concept of societal trauma, and how it could be very well at the root of a lot of our mental health issues. I'm going to connect between collective and personal PTSD, as well as the generational transmission of trauma and the impact on mental health and community stability. Now, I'll be using my home country of Zimbabwe as an example, basically talking about its historical past and then drawing the Western parallels at the end of my talk. What societal trauma is, right? Societal trauma refers to that collective trauma that's experienced by a large group, a community or society. And this can be due to events like war, colonization, epidemics, or systematic oppression, right? Now, unlike individual trauma, societal trauma affects the emotional and psychological well-being of entire communities, right? And it tends to embed itself in the cultural memory and behaviors of those societies. It doesn't just affect one generation. This collective pain and stress experience will often trickle down through families and communities, and it tends to create a legacy of unresolved trauma. Children and future generations inherit both the psychological and emotional wounds of previous generations, often through their behaviors, their coping mechanisms, and the learned fear or mistrust. So generational PTSD, this occurs when trauma is passed down from one generation to the next. Families inherit the emotional and psychological wounds from the past societal trauma, and this creates long-term mental health issues, right? And we have to understand that collective trauma influences individual responses, even if those people were not directly involved in that initial event or experience. So when societies experience events, again, like war, systematic violence, collective fear, anxiety, stress, these all seep into daily life. And this often results in personal struggles with PTSD as people start to internalize these collective emotions surrounding them. We have widespread societal distress, whether it's anxiety, grief, distrust. This creates an environment where trauma becomes a part of everyday life. When this trauma isn't fully addressed, and societal trauma rarely is addressed, unhealed trauma leaves emotional and psychological wounds. Right? So many societies, and we've just experienced a widespread societal trauma recently, which I'll speak on later, but there's often a reluctance to talk openly about these traumatic events. And this silence is what keeps the trauma alive, preventing it from being processed, and for future generations are left to carry its weight without understanding its origins. So now I'm going to go into the case study I was speaking about, which is the legacy of trauma in Zimbabwe, right? So Zimbabwe's history has been shaped by colonization, war, public health crises, economic collapse. So it provides a powerful case study for how societal trauma passed down through generations, especially when left unaddressed, can basically compound, right? We'll examine Zimbabwe's past and present, and we'll see the direct impact of collective trauma on both individual mental health and community stability. So bear with me here. I'm going to give you a little bit of history, a little bit of a history lesson into Zimbabwe for those that don't know too much about it. All right, so with Zimbabwe, I'm going to start from the Second Chimurenga War, right? Because obviously colonization played a huge part in our history, but I'm going to start from the part that I guess would be most relevant to my life in terms of post-independence. So we know that this war of independence was fought through guerrilla warfare, and it was a turning point in the nation's history. Obviously, this led to independence in 1980, right? Now, the war, it brought widespread violence, displacement, civilian casualties, affecting both those who fought and, of course, those who lived through it, right? Many were left with untreated PTSD, with depression, with anxiety, and there was little to no mental health support in place post-independence. All right. Now, all independence, right? Veterans, civilians, families, they all struggled to adapt to the new reality. And that's when the mental health crisis started to quietly emerge, right? When it comes to veterans, many returned without access to mental health care, leading to issues like domestic violence, substance abuse, difficulty reintegrating into society. And the end of colonialism didn't resolve the deep societal divisions that many felt disillusioned, as the peace and prosperity that they had hoped for were hard to achieve, right? So the trauma from Zimbabwe's liberation struggle, coupled with the lack of support, it continues to affect the nation today, right? This unhealed trauma has been passed down through generations, leading to ongoing instability and mental health issues. So there were mass displacements. We had people, here I experienced myself from my father's generation, right? They were deeply impacted by the war. My dad and a lot of his friends, they were all recruited as soldiers around the age of 16 to 18, right? So that's their childhood being affected by war. And when they came back and they started their own families, a lot of them, because of their unrelated PTSD, had difficulty holding jobs. They were very volatile in work positions. Many of them were guilty of domestic violence. And again, a lot of this is resulted to that undealt with PTSD, right? These veterans struggled to find stable employment. They would displace family members. And those who actually had mental health issues, because some did, they were often like, rejected by families and societies, right? We found issues like domestic violence, alcoholism, right? And of course, within the parenting realm, many parents were using authoritarian, rigid parenting. So family life was deeply affected. Families really felt the weight of the trauma. I remember that people really didn't talk about it, right? No one really talked about what happened in the war. And of course, there were also issues. In Zimbabwe, there are different racial dynamics, and there were complicated issues in regards to racial identity, because some people who are known as colored, and they're given a specific race in Zimbabwe as colored, they had certain privileges prior to independence, and a lot of those privileges were lost after independence. So this left a lot of economic strain on those communities, and then it amplified those issues I was talking about, of things like domestic violence, alcoholism within those communities. right? So this is just from the war. Now we move on to the 90s, where Zimbabwe faced an HIV/AIDS epidemic, as a lot of Southern Africa did. But this epidemic, it caused widespread fear. There was fear within communities. People were afraid of touching each other, sharing food, being near someone with HIV, right? There was paranoia that gripped the nation. And that fear lives within them. And at the same time, the epidemic did things like orphan lots of children were orphaned as a result of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And, even seeing someone, with a pimple or someone coughing a certain way would have people like scared. So now we have this fear, this unaddressed fear from the war. Now we've got this fear of this invisible threat, right? So now we have generation living in fear with HIV/AIDS. I remember when I was 14 years old, I actually saw a friend of my mom's a week before he passed away from AIDS. And it was the scariest thing I've ever seen. It's a thought I'll never forget. And all I can think about is that I only saw him once just before he passed, but he had family that were watching him, that were taking care of him, that were seeing him waste away. And this was a reality for many Zimbabweans. I've lost family, I've lost friends to HIV. So this was another truly unaddressed trauma in the Zimbabwean community. And then we move on now to the 2000s, right? So late 90s, 2000s, and we start. First, it starts with mass migration. So people like myself, in 2000, I left Zimbabwe, I came to Canada, and many people did too, going to different countries in the West, hoping for a better life, right? But then we get to these countries, and we're finding that we have a whole other layer of emotional pain. We had to leave behind our families, we had to leave behind our friends, and the only life that we knew. Many Zimbabweans in the diaspora were dealing with feelings of loss, grief, displacement, and this also led to emotional trauma, sometimes developing into PTSD or CPTSD. And of course, struggling to fit into this new world, for those of us who left, this was a whole different trauma for us because we suddenly became outsiders trying to fit into cultures that weren't welcoming to us. As Black and colored people in mostly white countries, we now had to deal with racial dynamics that were very different from what we knew. It brought its own set of challenges, adding another layer to our struggles, right? So many of the people in the colored community, they had issues with identity because when you come over here, their identity stripped away. Right. And then, of course, outside of that, we weren't like Black people in these countries. So now even those we are supposed to maybe associate with, it doesn't work. So we're really feeling isolated and alone. And this trauma of migration mixed with the unresolved traumas that we've carried from Zimbabwe led to mental health crises for many in the diaspora. There was a pressure to fit in, losing our cultural identity, trying to start over weighed heavily on us, right? And on top of it, we had issues of, taking care of people back home. There's the guilt from leaving. So we had mental health issues here, anxiety, depression, suicide, high among Zimbabweans in the diaspora. Leaving home while dealing with the difficulties of living in a foreign land and also still having to support those back home was a lot of pressure on those who moved to the diaspora. But now for those back home, they were dealing with their own struggles. Zimbabwe had the highest historical rates of high inflation, right? The economic collapse, it didn't just happen on its own, right? This was closely tied to economic sanctions that were put on the country by Western countries. And of course, this continued the harm caused by colonialism, right? These sanctions cut off vital trade, financial resources, it devastated the economy in Zimbabwe. And in case you don't know what hyperinflation looks like, Zimbabwe is a country that has had $1 bills as well as $100 trillion bills in rotation. So now I've covered war. We've got trauma from war left unaddressed. We've got trauma from health crisis left unaddressed. Now we've got the trauma of hyperinflation, which of course leads to poverty, left unaddressed. Right? So now we've got these compounding traumas in this society, all left unaddressed because the whole society is going through it. So it can't possibly affect you. So now we look at modern day Zimbabwe and there's a mental health crisis unfolding. This unresolved trauma from war, the HIV/AIDS, economic collapse, mass migration has all led to mental health crises in Zimbabwe today. The country is still struggling with the impact of these events and mental health issues are becoming more obvious than ever. Addiction, substance abuse. Alcoholism has been an issue in the past, but now we have a growing drug addiction problem, especially among the youth. And this is something that wasn't common before, and it shows how unaddressed trauma is affecting new generations in different ways. Addiction often comes from a place of pain, trauma, and feeling disconnected, and it reflects the deeper mental health problems that are being overlooked. There's a rise of suicide rates, particularly among young people, and this generation born into the country full of trauma. And it's not only dealing with their own struggles, but also with the trauma that's been passed down from previous generations. With little mental health support, ongoing economic problems, and the lack of community connection, many young people are feeling hopeless and don't know where to turn. But the biggest changes caused by these traumas is the shift from the close-knit community-based values Zimbabwe was once known for, to the more individualistic Western-influenced mindset, right? And the trauma has worn away trust, unity, collective support, and this used to define Zimbabwean culture. People used to rely on communities for support, trust, and shared values, and now there's a growing sense of disconnection. This trauma has fractured those bonds, leaving people feeling isolated and mistrustful in communities that were once tight-knit. So as Zimbabwe continues to deal with these traumas, there's been a noticeable shift towards Western individualistic values. And this focus more on personal success than community well-being, which has strained the social fabric of Zimbabwe, is going to cause many Zimbabweans to lose their sense of identity and cultural grounding. Again, that legacy of fear, distrust, as we've talked about, you can see how trauma has passed down through generations in Zimbabwe. Fear of trauma still show up in ways that people behave and in the mental health of the population. Communities that were once strong have been broken apart by fear and distrust, and these are direct results of the traumas that have built up over the years and shaped the nation. Zimbabwe is still trying to heal. The lack of resources, infrastructure for mental health support, these all are processes and they're slow and difficult, right? But now with all of this, I want to bring it back to drawing the parallels with Zimbabwe to the West. This situation sounds like it's dissonant. For those of you here in the Western world, it's like, okay, that's great, it's sad. That's not the reason I brought all of this up. I wanted to demonstrate because the West has a lot of these same things happening here. And they're going unresolved and overlooked because that's just how things are, right? When we look at war veterans and trauma in Zimbabwe, war veterans left with PTSD and trauma. They returned home without adequate support. This led to issues like domestic violence, substance abuse, family breakdowns. Now, when we look in the West, we're seeing the same thing, right? War veterans, although they have a little bit more support in terms of mental health, it's still not sufficient. They're still struggling with PTSD. Domestic violence tends to be quite high in homes of war veterans. And of course, substance abuse, drug addiction. These are all due to that unresolved trauma from these experiences. Then we move on to, and again, this failure to fully address the mental health. And that's the thing, is that people just don't address it. It's just like, oh, well, that's life. Everyone's going through it. But this is causing the trauma to stay stuck in people, in societies, individuals, in families, and it continues to compound. And now let's look at epidemics. We've all just lived through the COVID epidemic. And this parallels to the Zimbabwean HIV/AIDS epidemic, right? Because in Zimbabwe, we saw fear, trauma, many deaths. Communities suffered greatly, resulting in numerous orphan children who experienced both loss and stigma associated with the disease. And now with COVID-19, with this pandemic, I mean, this created a universal, like worldwide mass hysteria. And just like HIV and AIDS, COVID has left behind trauma, and it's truly not fully been addressed. Instead of openly discussing it, the mental health impacts, society has largely just forgotten it, swept it under the rug, as if there was no emotional toll on people and families during this pandemic. This dismissal of trauma, especially so soon after the pandemic, will likely have lasting consequences if left unaddressed, just like the trauma of HIV/AIDS did in Zimbabwe. And now mass migration and economic strain. Following the economic collapse, hyperinflation, many migrants sought better opportunities abroad, and then they faced more traumas from displacement, identity loss, difficulty assimilating into those cultures. And in the Western world, we see these similar patterns of migrations from the different wars around the world. Right? People are fleeing the wars, poverty, political instability, but what's happening is life in the West has gotten harder. So these migrants, they face significant challenges, including racism, economic instability, and a lack of support systems when they come to the West. Again, the current economic strain in the West has made it even harder for migrants to find opportunities that they seek, and many are dealing with trauma that is compounded by the difficult conditions that they face in these new countries. And then that shift from collectivism to individualism. And this is one of the key things that people don't recognize. Like we have to go back, right? The decline in collective care, shared responsibility. This has hindered trauma healing in Zimbabwe. Distrust, fear, isolation, these are all preventing the rebuilding of once strong communities. And here in the West, individualism, it's always been a dominant value, right? And unfortunately, we see that in how it's relating to mental health. It's leading to mental health crises, loneliness, community breakdown. The focus on individual success over collective care has resulted in feeling isolated and unsupported. So one of the most profound shifts post-independence, again, was this collective community-based living is now more individualistic, right? Western values, this shift has eroded the trust, the unity of these communities, and is contributing to ongoing trauma and disconnection. So one of the key takeaways from both the Zimbabwean and Western perspective is that the systems in place they aren't enough to heal the deep traumas we face. In both societies, there's a pressing need for holistic, and thankfully both of the ladies before me spoke about this, holistic trauma-informed approaches to wellness that recognize the interconnectedness of our mental, our physical, our emotional, and our spiritual health. And holistic practices, they encourage us to return to community, right? To see ourselves as part of a whole, to care for one another in the way that Western individualism it often neglects. Trauma cannot be healed in isolation. Community, connection, compassion, these are key to healing. And a part of holistic healing is really understanding. And from my perspective, it's the biopsychosocial, spiritual aspect, right? Biologically, taking care of your physical health is key. Eating well, staying active, keeping your body healthy. Mental, we're looking at your mind. Mental health is important. Mindfulness practices, working through past traumas, these can all help you stay emotionally balanced and become more at peace. And of course, that community part I'm talking about. And this is why I spoke about societal trauma, because it's so often overlooked, the traumas we face just being part of societies that have got compounded trauma. We heal better when we heal together. Being a part of supportive community, sharing practices, leaning on each other, this creates a sense of belonging, and that makes the healing process easier. And then, of course, the spiritual aspect, connecting to something bigger than yourself, whether through spirituality, personal practices, religion, this gives you a sense of purpose, a sense of inner peace, grounding you on a deeper level. Now, I know I've asked, there will be some Zimbabweans in the audience. So to some of my Zimbabweans in the audience, a lot of our healing, I believe, is rooted in our villages, in the cultural practices, in the collective values that once brought us together as people. Moving away from individualism, Western values that promote that individual self-serving type of way of life, and reconnect with the wisdom of our ancestors and our cultural roots. We can start to heal the generational trauma that still impacts us today. I say go back home. And I don't mean physically. People like myself can't go back home. I've got children here. My home is here now. But what I mean by go back home is return to the village. It's about returning to those values of community, of care, of collective support. The love, care, healing we need can be found in the traditions and the cultural practices that were passed down through generations. By embracing these practices instead of looking at them as if they basically irrelevant because Western perspectives have told them that they are, we can use them to rebuild trust. We can use them to rebuild connection. We can use them to rebuild collective care, things that will truly help us heal. Now, whether you're in Zimbabwe or in the West, the key to healing from trauma is reconnecting with our communities, with each other, and with ourselves. By embracing holistic, trauma-informed approaches to wellness, we can begin to heal the deep wounds that have made worse by individualism and disconnection. Healing isn't something we can do alone. It's a journey, and we need to take this journey together. It's not only supporting each other and rebuilding our communities, that we can truly tackle those deep-seated traumas and continue to impact us. So in conclusion, I hope you're still here with me. In conclusion, I would just like to say that once more, by embracing these holistic practices, get back in touch with yourself. The divine is within you. Getting back in touch with yourself opens you up to healing, opens you up to connecting with others, connect with the community, find your people. We can heal. And the lady coming out next is April. She's going to tell us how to heal from the inside out. And I'm excited about that. But understand that we are living in societies that have got trauma upon trauma passed down. And we have to start addressing these traumas instead of just pretending like they're not a part of our reality. I'm actually surprised I made the talk in the 20 minutes. So before I close, one of the things, a few of the free resources, as Jason said, that we'll be adding to the site. I've got an ebook, Rewriting the Story, Healing Generational Trauma, that kind of breaks down trauma from that biopsychosocial spiritual perspective that I mentioned my work is based on. And then I also have a little ebook that this can use with yourself, or you can use with your kids, with little breathing and grounding exercises to help you like really regulate your emotions when you're going through it. And I'll also have a free webinar next week on September 27th, where I will help you learn the MIT method, which is a method I created based on awareness, mindfulness, authenticity, intuition, and time, to help you start your healing journey and really get into that, living that intentional life, helping to break these cycles of generational trauma. That's my talk.
Looks like your business might be in a bit of a pickle. Don't you worry about a thing. You ain't alone in this. You're just a success story waiting to happen. Trust me on that. Every bump in the road is just an opportunity wearing a clever disguise. Welcome to the Hounds of Business community, where we don't just sit around twiddling our thumbs. Nope, we turn those obstacles into mighty fine stepping stones. This here's a place where high-level entrepreneurs and sharp professionals gather to grow their businesses and mindsets, kind of like how a good old gumbo needs the right ingredients to be something special. Ideas thrive here, and collaborations, well, they're as natural as sweet tea on a hot day. Success, it's a journey, and we're fixing to walk that road right beside you. Now, don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn for all the latest tips and insights. We're talking about the kind of wisdom that'll keep you ahead of the game. And while you're at it, head on over to our YouTube channel. We've got ourselves a treasure trove of videos, from expert interviews to webinars, everything you need to stay sharp in this fast-moving world of business. The Hounds of Business community? Well, we ain't just a network, we're a movement. So why not come on and be part of something bigger? Join us today and let's turn your business journey into a real Southern success story. Together, we'll achieve greatness, just like crawfish and singing on a Friday night.
All right. So our next speaker coming to the stage is April Wyett. Thank you so much. April Wyett is a holistic health counselor. Through her unique blend of emotional intelligence, meditation, and holistic wellness practices, April creates a sanctuary where stress and tension simply melt away. Welcome to the stage, April.
Hello. Thank you for having me here. Wow, I am just really blown away, but then it doesn't surprise me of the amazing presenters that are here on this expo, Jason. Really amazing how people are coming together, and this is what co-creation's all about. As Tennille had talked about, we need that community of support, not just for others, but mostly for ourselves, as we've all experienced some sort of trauma or PTSD. And I call this, when we come together and build this community and share these amazing insights, because I'm very excited to learn from the other presenters as well, this is really creating the stone soup of collective consciousness. This can only exist here. And it's because we've aligned and we've come together with our intention to be of service and to help others as we've been through struggles ourselves. And that's really that human connection. And I am doing my best here to present my slides, and we'll see what happens, what magic will happen here. Let's see, there we go. So I am all about holistic healing. It is everybody's kind of alluded to already, right? Faith-based, also understanding the mechanics of our own minds and bodies, and neuroscience, neuroplasticity, as Lisa alluded to as well. It's all about us knowing and getting a better understanding of who we are. And I call that working from the inside out. We can only do that for ourselves. And so this expo isn't just about providing information. Most importantly, it's that co-creation that I talked about. And as Relly talked about, you know, her faith, Tennille shared about generational trauma and the effects on the macro level. I'm going to be talking on the lens of the micro level, getting down into the cellular level, into the nervous system. And I founded Living with Intention because I realized people, no matter what age, have experienced trauma and they want more for themselves, but those underlining things that are happening within their minds and bodies are preventing them from moving forward. So that's what working from the inside out is all about, with the mindfulness and the emotional intelligence, and also thinking about the layers that we're working through. So there is a strong correlation between PTSD and suicide. In September, this is the month it's aired here, this expo, is Suicide Awareness Month. And when people can see past themselves as being broken and detached, and they can actually understand a little bit more about themselves, right? About the biological aspects that are happening, the emotional dysregulation, maybe why they can't control their mind and body in response to the trauma experience. And they might feel that there's no way out. But building a better relationship, starting with ease and grace, having that grace for ourselves really helps. So that way we can accept ourselves and bring in that forgiveness for ourselves and others. And having these resources, you know, the tools to implement also is part of that community of support. And it's crucial, you know, over time, because this creates self-efficacy and empowerment to override those echoes of the trauma. So it is my passion to empower those who have experienced PTSD by offering this holistic approach, to think outside the box, to foster a better relationship with themselves, which is the foundation of holistic health and wellness. And I have to figure out how to move to the next slide. So here we are, we're talking about a heavy subject, right? And if you didn't hear Kaleigh's, and I'm pronouncing her name wrong, excuse me, the first presenter, she asked us to pause and drop in. And that's exactly what I'm inviting you to do, is just to take a breath. Whatever you're doing right now, look away from your device, or if you're listening, look out the window and just take a breath. Check in and see, where is your breath right now? There's a lot going on in our world, in communities, in our professional and private lives. And if we're not aware, this leads to that dysregulation. So as you're breathing, feeling your feet on the floor, your backside in the seat, asking, can I just find a little bit more space here for myself? You know, give yourself the permission to take a break, to pause and reset your nervous system. Allows you to open your perceptions and knowledge of what's going well in this moment. There's so many things going well, although our minds try and focus on what isn't to try and protect us. And that's not right or wrong. It's just how the brain is hardwired. So this is what builds your emotional intelligence. This is working from the inside out. And we need space to witness how we're feeling and what sensations we're experiencing. Self-regulation is key when it comes to just addressing the echoes of trauma and PTSD that's rising to the surface. As our world is shifting and changing, can heighten anxiety and depression and overwhelm. And this actually catapults, right, the trauma and PTSD as Tennille had brought forward. And we feel these effects amplified in our minds and in our bodies. So these statistics speak for themselves. Although I want you to focus on the last, right, of how secondhand trauma affects children, generations. It ripples into our family, the workplace, the community. And this is that secondary trauma without even saying a word. And we can go beyond the labels and the symptoms. When we can do that and look through a holistic lens, it actually changes how we think of ourselves, others, and the world. And we can heal generations this way. As Wayne Dyer, who's one of my favorite persons, he says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And so this is about going beyond. Implementing the holistic wellness is addressing the whole person, the mind, body, emotions, and spiritually. I know because of my own journey. And also, I've had the privilege of supporting groups and individuals from across the globe. And it still is the same echo that's within all humans, is wanting to be seen, heard, and valued. And I started to shift my own perceptions and witness those echoes within me. And it took, it's challenging. This is so challenging because you have to be present and willing to sit with it. Lean in and listen. Knowing that these echoes of the trauma, it does not have the answer, but it does have the key to unlock the doors within. So Gabor Maté is a Hungarian-born Canadian physician and author, and he talks about generational trauma and what we don't do to heal ourselves passes down to generations. And his main focus is on addiction, and that is a trauma that's passed down. And he says that from the Greek word, trauma is wound, and it is not what happens to you, it is what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. So think about that. That it's kind of a backwards thing, but think about that. PTSD develops after the traumatic event, if not addressed holistically. It's those echoes within the body, within the nervous system. Didn't have a chance to release. It didn't receive the emotional, physical, mental support that we need. And I don't know if you're familiar with this book, The Body Keeps the Score. As Bessel van der Kolk, he conducted a groundbreaking research on PTSD. And he worked through, in the 70s and 80s, working with veterans and then expanding to other people. So it's just not veterans, war combat, but other people experiencing traumatic experiences in their lives. And he focused on the body's responses. And in his book, he talks about how the exposure of the abuse, violence fosters the development of a hyperactive alarm system, right? That's our nervous system, and molds the body. It gets stuck in that fight, flight, freeze. Fawning also is part of that. And that trauma interferes with our brain circuits, as Lisa talked about so perfectly. I love it. And the flexibility of being able to stay in emotional control, right? So when we have these experiences, this constant sense of danger, that red flag goes up in our alarm system. We don't even have to think about it. That's what the amygdala does. And it's searching for threats all the time. And that wreaks havoc on our immune system and the functions of our organs. So they discovered how to actually heal PTSD through 3 different modalities. And that is EMDR, which is amazing, and body awareness. You have to be aware of your body. You have to be in your body. When we are in trauma, we're out of our bodies. We disassociate. We want to leave. It doesn't feel good. It's scary. And so when we're more present and in our body and aware through breath work, through yoga, then we can actually understand that, oh, it is safe here. I can breathe. Things are going a little better, right? Especially with the group support. The group support with peer interactions and faith-based circles. You know, we all need faith. You know, it really brings us back to our own spirituality and a deeper connection with ourself and with God, whomever you believe your higher power to be. In this space, we can have that deeper connection to ourselves. Here is where we can actually ease our mind and let go and let God, knowing that there's a higher power helping us. You know, that sense of safety allows us to relax and open for healing. And recently, science is shifting from the solid body of just, oh, this is what's happening, these are the symptoms of the body, working through more of the nervous system, right? Something intangible as it's influenced by energy, that nervous system, the chemicals released from our brains, and the thoughts. These are the things not seen beneath the surface. And that brings me to more of the central nervous system. You know, Dr. Stephen Porges, he's the founder of the polyvagal theory, and he emphasizes the role of the autonomic nervous system through the vagus nerve. So you can see in this picture that yellow highlighted nerve running from the back of the head. It's also called the wandering nerve. You can see how it goes all the way through the chest, all the way down into the pelvic system, pelvic area. And it plays in regulating our health and behavior. So this neurosensory senses beyond the physical, this energetic scanning that we have from the nervous system helps us to relate to others and to our environment and to ourselves. And when it's heightened or hijacked and it's in a chronic state, then we don't feel safe. Then we're not able to self-regulate. So it's about understanding how it works. And the only thing that we can control in the autonomic nervous system is our breath. It switches from that sympathetic nervous system, that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, to the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest. Now it takes time and practice, as Lisa said. Practice. Bring yourself back. Just bring yourself back again and again, and then things become a little easier. Part of it is vagal toning. It's another valuable resource you can implement. You can start this today, and that has to do with this jaw area. So it's humming. So if you like to sing, if you even already find yourself humming or singing when you get nervous, that's your body already self-regulating. You're doing something naturally that you might not even know that you're doing. And activated yawning. Yawning helps. Just taking that deep breath in and out, opening up the back of the throat instead of keeping our jaws clamped. Also cold water therapy, putting cold water on your hands. Make sure your hands are really cold, and then placing one hand on your forehead and one hand on the back of your neck. And breathe in deeply and exhale. Doing that a few times, that actually resets your nervous system. So treating the whole person holistically, right? Offering well-rounded support for cohesive recovery is essential. And I learned this through my own healing journey with biodynamic breathwork and trauma release system, also known as BBTRS. As I was working with returning citizens at Iowa prisons, I introduced a quick, easy box breathing exercise. And I was just blown away by their reaction to being in the parasympathetic nervous system. They had never been there. They were born into trauma. Fight, flight, freeze, go, go, go. I have to protect, right? So I realized that there was something bigger here. So, of course, being of service, I decided to investigate. And so I found a BBTRS training, and I went to it myself. And it put all the pieces together. And it not only supported me, but also my own healing of trauma, of PTSD, that I didn't even realize was underneath the surface. There are 6 components, just to give you a quick overview. It's a connected breath with the BBTRS. You're actually fully present and you're aware. And then they invite movement. We need to move our bodies because most of the time when we're in trauma, we freeze. Or we are in movement, but it's the fast, right? Got to keep going, got to keep working, got to keep doing these things. Or the sound. And I got the alarm here that I'm at time. So I just wanted to share this about that I had no idea that my body was more intelligent than my mind when I went through this training. And when I was 9 years old, I was in a horrible car accident with my mother, who was driving under the influence of prescription drugs. And she rolled the car and I flew out the back window. And my body had held that trauma for 31 years until I had an incredible experience through my training. And it happened just in a flash. I saw everything unfold. And within that instant, I was able to release that trauma. I allowed it, my body allowed it to move through me. I didn't even realize that all those years I had held resentment towards my mother for that car crash when I was 9 years old. I resented her because the roles changed. I had to take care of her, and there was no one there to take care of me. So after that experience, my body felt full and open and vibrant, as if I was breathing for the first time. So this is how we can heal generations, right? By taking a holistic approach. This helps to shift not only ourselves, but our friends, family, and as I said, I believe it heals past and future generations. the more we can lean in and listen to the echoes, recognizing that they are part of us, we can accept ourselves. And trusting in God and the plan. We also build our emotional intelligence. So we are the ripple effect. As you ripple out to others in the world, again, that helps shift, right? And knowing that you are enough. And the act of kindness is more for yourself first. And as you fill your cup with that, then it's easier to support others. So I thank you for choosing to be here with me and tune in. Please feel free to reach out. That is my QR code to my website. I also offer a free discovery call for the biodynamic breath work if you're interested in that, and also other practices if that's a good fit for you. And also I have free resources on my website as well to help you self-regulate, to give you a more mindfulness approach so you can check in and be aware what's happening right now in this moment. I also offer reset and restore your mind and body retreats. And I have one coming up in Bali in November. So again, you can find that on that QR code. And I so appreciate you and the extra time as we are healing and working from the inside out. Thank you so much.
Injury has many forms. Breaking your leg would be treated like an injury. You would see a doctor and get an x-ray. But what happens when you have emotional trauma? Would you just walk it off? Push your feelings to the side? Ignore it? It can change the brain, and that change can be seen, just like a broken leg. And just like a broken leg, PTSI can be treated. Help us change the name from PTSD to PTSI. Remove the stigma, save lives. This PSA is sponsored by Erase PTSD Now, a 501c3 nonprofit.
Ben Burdette is an executive coach and founder and CEO of Net Worth. To Ben, coaching is not just a profession, but a way of life, empowering clients to recognize their needs, values, and goals through a dedicated partnership.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Hey, it is a pleasure to be on with you. And to the panel who's already spoken, what a great group of folks. And to Jason, Circle of Friends, Freedom Flight Expo, this is a phenomenal opportunity that we can just really come together and just talk about this very important topic. What I really want to share with you is something very personal, something that I have faced personally, but both on the professional stage as well. And so really, I think to be a scene setter, I want to read to you an excerpt of a book I'm working on. And this, I think, will tell the story a little bit of my background and why I'm here with you today. It starts like this. His desk was cleared. Nothing could be seen out of order. This was not like our other conversations involving loose leaf papers, whiteboards, and humorous alert stories. This was the responsibility of our duties every commander or delegate treads. His hands were trembling, and he cleared his throat as he spoke, reading from the printed paper in front of him. I knew what was coming. There I stood, at attention, embracing for impact. Behind me was the shirt, traditionally a master sergeant in the Air Force by rank, charged with the care and the feeding of the troops inside of the unit. His job was to receive him, to be the fall guy. He and I had become good friends over the last several months leading up to this very day. He shared jokes, swapped kid stories, wrestled over the hard leadership challenges every commander faces, and so much more. We had become brothers in arms through this season, and I could not be more grateful that he was there. He was just following protocol. He knew that there were no concerns in how I would respond, nor was he concerned about me doing anything to myself or anyone else. He just wanted to be there and know that he was there for me, and that is all I could have asked for. In that moment, the deputy group commander, a colleague and a friend of mine, he executed the unfortunate task by mustering these words. Lieutenant Colonel Burdette, on behalf of the operations group commander, You are hereby relieved of command. With my heart racing and my palms beginning to sweat, I couldn't help but break the awkward moment. Halfway through his issuance, I stopped him. I said, Matt, put the paper down. Give me a hug. This isn't on you, man. A sigh of relief came over him. His eyes and his shoulders dropped into this slump posture. Dude, I'm so sorry, he responded. As he stood several inches taller than me and looking down over the piece of paper that he held. With a big exhale, he mumbled these words. This really sucks, man. I rounded the desk. He dropped the paper to his side and I extended my hand and we shook. But without hesitation, I pulled him in for a big brother-like hug. He needed to know that I was okay. We pushed away and I began to leave the room when I realized that I forgot one thing. Hey, Matt, I exclaimed as I breached the doorway one last time. This is yours. So I reached for my badge, my command badge on my chest, and ripped it from the Velcro and I slid it across the desk. I said, this is yours now. He refused. He says, I cannot take this. I commanded him, pushed it across the desk, smiled, turned, and walked out. Under the escort of the shirt, I passed the secretary, the executive officer, and the group's chief, our most senior enlisted advisor. Their handshakes, smiles, and hugs meant the world. It was undoubtedly a sad goodbye. We had shared in both the good and the bad, and I could not thank them enough. I made it a point to smile and relive that any concerns regarding the health and well-being, for I was not only going to let this moment define me. Little did I know, but my wife had coordinated dinner and dessert in my office that evening. I had to have it cleaned out by that morning. So she wanted to make sure that we went out with a bang. I rolled in the office later that evening, humbled by the amount of people who showed up to help. Pack up. My troops, fellow commanders, spouses, and kids filled the room. Handshakes, hugs, and tears abound. Many were given a no-contact order, but no one seemed to care. They knew that I had acted with integrity and the best of intentions. No one saw this to be my fault, but a burden I would carry regardless. Who knew this would summarize my time in command? 137 days, roughly 4.5 months. Well, it depends on who you talk to, but most commanders are still trying to find their way to their office in that short a period of time. I often believe and feel as if I experienced more in 137 days than most commanders will do during their entire command, yet alone their entire career. So here I stood, fired, relieved of command, physically and emotionally exhausted, directed to take 10 days of leave so the system could pick up the pieces, regroup, and continue without me. To give you context, I must start from the very beginning. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my story. This is where I came from. This is what began in me, this effort that we now pursue in the leadership space of leaders across the world. Today's message really for me is purpose over pain, and that is harnessing the power of self-worth. And this was the discovery for me as I really went through this walk in our life. I believe these three things. I believe that every individual, regardless of their experience, has inherent value. I believe that surviving a traumatic event doesn't diminish this value. Instead, it highlights the inner strength and the resilience that must be recognized and nurtured. I believe that painful experiences are catalysts for growth. By understanding and processing these experiences, they can be redirected to fuel personal development and contribute positive to the lives of others, but also yourself. And we must break the silence and stigma around mental health. I love that advertisement right before I came on to speak. I think this spoke specifically to this part because I think in military environments, we must encourage the dialogue and support systems that uplift rather than compress, enabling our veterans to reclaim their narratives and thrive beyond their trauma. I can speak truly that only a few months ago, before I retired from the Air Force, there was a mental health crisis, and there still continues to be, especially from a provider perspective. I know individuals that are waiting on mental health support, sometimes months, several months at a time, before they can receive the services that they need. And that is something that is systemic inside of our system across the DoD, finding not only providers that can support, but also just providing the care and need and feeding for our troops that are in harm's way today. This is what I will share. I truly believe that to lead others, you must first lead yourself. Now, in this very circumstance, I don't want to focus on the toxicity and the leadership beyond my own self in the story that I just shared. This is purely my response to this and how I want to, number one, step away and step forward. And this has nothing to do about anybody that was involved. And also, as many of the others have claimed, I am not an expert in mental health. I'm not an expert in trauma, specifically when it comes to counseling or diagnosis. And I will not attempt to do that today. Merely what I want to do is to share my story and help others understand and provide that space for the community that I think is crucially important. But again, to lead others, I truly believe that you must first lead yourself. There was a moment several years ago when I was in Miami, Florida. I was in college and I got to listen to a speaker, and he brought out this display and he goes, isn't it funny that in the times of ourselves, when we are all alone, that it's almost like a toothpaste bottle. When you're all by yourself, the internals of that toothpaste is squeezed out in front of the table in front of you, and you get to see who you truly are. At Net Worth, we call that our raw reflection. At what point do we have the opportunity to look ourselves in the mirror and truly accept us for who we really are? I think this is the basis of any traumatic event and any mental health crisis that we find ourselves in. Can we truly accept and see ourselves for who we are and where we are at that moment? Because it is there that I truly believe that we can only grow. We have to know our value, right? Being lonely sparks the hardest but the greatest returns of investments. This self-discovery is absolutely critical. We have to commit to being the best version of you. Daily disciplines, goals, boundaries, etc. They have to be in place, and we have to take steps towards those directions. And it's all about bringing others along. This is not a lonely journey. We have to have mentors. We have to have coaches. We have to have folks that are going to come along our side and support this with us. I have this saying that I believe. I said, we have to set our heart, then we have to let our heart. And I want you to hear that again. You have to set your heart, then let your heart. I'm a firm believer that telling our stories is impactful, and it will really change the world if we're able to do it in a specific way towards the experiences that we've had. And by setting your heart, knowing yourself, creating that space of your own value, that allows then you to let your heart lead and change the world in a positive manner. But you have to be able to know your value to lead yourself. Second, I believe that your attitude is everything. It establishes the tone. I'm a firm believer in this is a choice. Are we either going to accept what has occurred to us, or are we going to abandon it? We've heard that already from the great panelists that have already been here today. If you're in a position where you're going to accept it, you acknowledge it, you were then saying that it is real and that you're going to do something about it. But if you abandon it, you push it away, you cover it up, you hide it under a rock, it will continue to fester and grow worse with time, as any problem that we come in face with. I'm a firm believer that knowledge is observable facts. Anything that we may read or learn. And then the experience basically is these learned behaviors that we have when we apply the knowledge that we're being given. And I truly believe that this equals the perspective, what we will call a formed attitude. It is here that if you believe truth begins at this point, this is a great thing for you. It will then begin to diversify your understanding. It will drive a culture of appreciation in yourself and those around you. And it will ultimately allow you to accelerate reach and influence, whether it's for you, your team, or your family, or whatever group or community that you find yourself in. But if you believe that truth ends at this point, it's going to create a blind awareness. You're going to foster a stunt growth culture, and you're going to degrade your capability as an individual and become a stalemate wherever you are, whether you are a human being by yourself or whether you're in a group or a community. It is this thinking and this attitude that I believe is everything. Third, I truly believe that people want to be seen and heard. These are my things, and I shared these with my kids when I retired at my final retirement event. I said, I need you to be kind. I need you to be courageous. But most importantly, I need to be you. I think what mental health does to us is it breaks us away from being exactly who we were designed to be. It breaks down our truest inner self, and it has to be addressed, and it has to be addressed in a very magnificent way. We need to get to know those that we lead and those that we work with and or work for. This is something I learned through the experience when I was fired as a military commander, right? This is what I love about Simon Sinek, right? This is the narrative he will share. He goes, the more questions you ask, the more data you get, the more you can lead with empathy. And he asked the question, he goes, why? Because you now understand unlike before. It is in those moments that you collect that information, you begin to understand, see others for different. They may have different ways of thinking and how they challenge themselves. But if you choose not to, well, that's a heart problem. And that goes back to my first point in setting your heart. You must know the difference. I have learned that people will forget what you say. People will forget what you do, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that is from Maya Angelou. Man, what a great comment and what a great thing to say in regards to how we as individuals interact with each other. If you were leading a team, if you're leading yourself, right? What kind of grace are you bestowing? What kind of opportunity are you giving? Are you listening to everyone in the room? Are you listening merely just to allow them to speak? And are you giving them the opportunity to provide input? This is a systemic thing inside of our military, and we must address it. We must fight the perceptions. We have to go against false troops and gossip, and we have to work to learn to understand. There's a difference between what we may agree and what we believe on, and we have to know the truth between the two. We must seek first to understand, then to be understood, and that's from Stephen Covey. But in the process of all of this, the core of it is relationships, and relationships matter. How we cultivate them and consistent caring and feeding. Remember, you're human too. And how you act and how you treat others is really, really important. This is the most challenging piece of it all. Are we able to take what we know about ourselves and how we lead ourselves, about the attitudes that we have, and knowing really how people operate under the premise of wanting to be seen and heard? Are we willing to reach out and make the ultimate change? Do the best until you know what is better. And then once you know what is better, do better. And that is the core and the essence of so much that I faced inside of my story and inside of my time when I was a commander inside of the ranks. It was an exceptionally lonely time, and it was an exceptionally hard time. And I do not want to take that moment and make it any more egregious or any more important than many of the events that our veterans will share and will experience. Because I'll be honest with you, it's not. I have men and women, unfortunately, that I know dear hand, that executed people under authorities that weren't theirs, that were forced to do things as an individual for a nation that they will forever think and dream about. It is a horrible thing to hold as an individual. But trauma exists in so many different ways, as we have already heard today. And this is just an example of what that trauma looks like. I just want to say thank you guys for hearing my story a little bit. What I would love to say is, hey, I'm on LinkedIn. I would love to connect with anybody. And if you do not have a community, today you have a community in me. And you need to know that. If you have anybody that you know that is a veteran, whether they're active or retired, or they have an experience, I tell you what, I'm here for them, and that is at free of charge. If you want to get to know more about me, you can reach me at ben@thenetworthleader.com. That's my email. You can also connect with me by getting on my calendar via my LinkedIn profile, and thenetworthleader.com is our website. Super excited to be here. What a very important event to talk about trauma, to talk about mental health, and really just to share our stories to make a lasting impact, to make sure that we ensure that this continues to get better rather than worse with time. Thank you for having me.
Carol Banens is a certified grief educator and grief to gratitude coach. She helps individuals navigate their grief and reclaim their lives through her Choose program, empowering them to move forward with confidence while maintaining a meaningful connection to their loved ones. Welcome to the stage, Carol.
Hello, everybody. And Jason, thank you so much for inviting me to talk about grief at the end of this session. And I just wanted to say that I have a lot of experience with grief. I lost my sister when I was 9, parents, grandparents, and 6 years ago, my husband Brian died. So I'm a widow. And I am going to talk today specifically about the impact that suicide has on grief, because it's very different. And yes, my family has been touched by suicide as well. And so let's talk about grief. What is grief? Well, grief is any significant loss. Now, we could talk about divorce, pet loss, people, jobs, quality of life, but specifically today we are going to talk about death by suicide. Now, the normal things that we can expect, let's talk about that with grief. What can we actually expect when we are grieving? I don't know about anybody here, but I had no clue. I thought I did, but I really didn't. It is a whole body experience. It is mind, body, and soul. And so, of course, we expect the sadness, we expect the overwhelm, we expect the fatigue, the lethargy of fatigue, or perhaps we don't. But because it's such a hard thing to process when we're processing a loss, it takes a lot of energy. And with that comes a lot of physical symptoms as well, possibly heart palpitations. We have an increased respiratory rate. We have aches and pains that appear that haven't been there for years, and new ones. We have cognitive issues. We aren't able to think. We have difficulty making decisions. We can't focus. We can't read. That's just the tip of the iceberg. So what's different when you are grieving a death by suicide? Well, I think take that list of things I just said, amplify it, turn the volume to full, and I think that might just be a taste of what these people are feeling. And so they're not only feeling all the normal things, but they have some very specific difficulties and challenges to deal with. The first is stigma. You know, we are in a grief-phobic society, much like mental health. Nobody wants to talk about it. So Jason, thank you for this opportunity for us all to discuss it. Nobody talks about grief. It's the one thing we know we're all going to experience. There's going to be a death somewhere along the line. And of course, we will eventually die. And people are uncomfortable about it. Society is almost grief-phobic. We don't want to mention it. And when somebody dies, we don't really know what to say, and we don't really know how to handle it. Now, add on to that a suicide or a death by addiction, we have a whole different level, don't we, of uncomfortableness, of people withdrawing right when the griever, the suicide survivor, needs them the most. And they get to feel shame. They feel like they're tainted by what has happened, by the choice, not of their choice, but the choice the other person, the victim, made when they died. And so people tend to sort of step away. We know David Kessler, who's a renowned grief expert, said that funerals for those who have died by suicide or addiction are less well attended. So in those moments, those terrible moments of grief, when you want to come together as a community, which we have heard today how important it is, there's a fracturing of that community because they don't really know what to do. So we have the stigma. Then we have the judgment. Now, I think as a griever, we're very sensitive and we may think that others judge us. And I think it's real. I think there is judgment. There's the questioning, well, didn't you know it was going to happen? Couldn't you see the signs? Weren't you aware? And all of these questions come up from others, and people will sometimes voice them. And can you imagine somebody you love has just died and people are questioning you, and it's almost as if they can't talk ill of the dead. And so there's a blame going on that the griever then absorbs. And there's that shame and that self-judgment that comes from that. Because now, as a griever, you're thinking, well, did I miss the signs? Could I have done more? If only I had taken their call. And the guilt David Kessler again, I'm going to quote him, because he says, you know, our mind would rather feel guilty than helpless. And for sure, in grief, we feel helpless, any sort of grief, but particularly this unexpected death where you had no chance to say goodbye. And so that guilt can start eating away at you. And as a griever from suicide, I think that you want to know why. Why did they do it? Why didn't they reach out? Why didn't they talk to someone? And it's these constant questions that start to consume the griever that we don't really have in normal grief. You might say, why did my husband have cancer? This is what my husband died from. But we accept it. But we find it very difficult to accept the choice that our loved one has made, that they chose to die. And so we want to know why. And it can be something that consumes the griever. They start almost like a detective to go over the before, what happened, what was said, could it have been changed, all of these things. And this doesn't help with the grieving. And I think the other thing that is really difficult is actually saying, my loved one died by suicide. I was talking to somebody the other day, and somebody said, are you married? And she said, no, my husband died suddenly. And they said, oh, what of? Which is a common thing. And she said, oh, a heart attack. She couldn't say that he died by suicide. And I think that a griever now has to choose, who are they going to tell? Are they going to tell? Are they going to keep up a lie? And this is actually at the worst time of their lives. They've got all these other layers of things to think about on top of their normal grief. Anger, something that we feel in grief sometimes, but there can be real anger against the person who died. Why did you do that? Why did you abandon me? Why did you leave me? I am so mad at you. Of course, you feel abandoned, you feel left behind, and anger is normal. And so how can we help people who are going through this particular type of grief? I think the first thing we have to think of in the early days is self-care, because you are numb. We've talked about numbness. You're in shock. You may not be, it may seem surreal, like it's not even happening. It can't have happened. And so if you can have somebody come and stay with you for a couple of weeks, you may not be able to eat. You may not be able to cook. So having somebody put a bowl of soup in front of you and just urging you to eat. Because as I've said, grief takes a lot of energy. And if you're not eating, you don't have the energy. Sleep, of course, very nice for me to say, make sure you have a good sleep. But in grief, sleeping is difficult. In the suicide, sleeping is even worse, because you may actually have PTSD. You may have been the person to find the body. How do you sleep? Well, this is where you need to speak to somebody, a therapist, counselor, to really start dealing with the trauma of this grief. And we've had other people who are more experienced in this than me, but this is where you need to go. We need to support you to have the energy to deal with this. You need people to take messages for you, emails for you. Perhaps if you're a young widow or widower, you need a rota of people who will take your children to school, create a routine, even for you, just taking you, driving you, because you may be distracted. And the other thing, of course, is support. How do we support you? Well, all of those things. But specifically, I think for suicide, it's important to be in a suicide grief support group. One that is particularly for suicide, because when you walk into that group, you know that they understand. You know that they have lived this tragedy unlike anybody else. And so when you go into a support group, often led by peers, by people who themselves have experienced a death by suicide, you're going to see people in the early stages, but people who are now coming back to their own life and starting to live again. They're starting to figure out, how do we move back to life after this? And I think one of the most challenging things is, how do we move on into life, move towards life, without this grief defining us? Any grief, but particularly this grief. And I think this comes with acceptance. We've already heard about acceptance, accepting that it is a fact, that they chose to end their life, that you are not to blame, that you had no control over this last final moment. When you can accept that, and I'm not saying that's easy, because it really isn't, because those why questions keep coming up, then you have the ability to let that go. Accept that you may not have answers to these unanswerable questions, that you can ruminate over it, you can go over it with a fine-tooth comb and still never find the answer. And so I think as a grief coach, my job is to help people understand there is no blame, and how they can reclaim their life, their self-identity, because their role and their identity is going to be changed, without losing connection to their loved one, without being defined by the way their loved one died, and with the ability to remember their loved one for their life, not for their last few minutes. Because I think when we think of a death by suicide, we think of these last few minutes, we think of their death, and it's almost as if we forget they had a life, they lived a life. So we have to learn how to integrate our grief, how to allow it to come with us, to carry with us, how to deal with emotions, how not to push them down. Other speakers here have talked so beautifully about mindfulness and meditation and all of these things that we need to bring in to calm the nervous system of the griever. They don't feel safe. It's a threat. So we need to do all of these things to allow people to live their life. So I think it's in that acceptance, in that ability to let go of blame and of guilt, that you can come to some sort of peace. Now, I wrote a book because I did push my emotions down after my husband died, and it was grief poetry. And I'm going to read one specifically today. Thanks, Ben, because you read. I'm going to read now. And it's called Fermenting Grief. And I want to read it because it touches on why we can't push our emotions down, because it leads to more mental health issues. In fact, they say that 10% of psychiatric illnesses are due to unresolved grief. So we have to support people in grief. Acute grief, 1 to 2 years. And you know, most people at a year will say, are you better now? No. Getting over the loss of a significant other, 5 to 8 years. Isn't that mind-blowing that it takes so long? Yet if we have the right support, perhaps we can bring those numbers down. So I'm going to read this one. It's from my book, Kintsugi Your Heart, The Art of Living with Grief, and it's called Fermenting Grief. The temptation, when in so much pain, is to push it down, ignore, distract, try and relegate it to a dark corner. But there it will sit, grief fermenting, bubbling away beneath the surface of your life, seeping into your cells one by one, until the lid can't be kept on it any longer. It is released with such force that you don't know what hit you. It was the grief that you tucked away to deal with later, but now grown, expanded, stronger. The answer, dear one, is not to resist these painful feelings, but to do what seems perplexing, and that is to allow. Resisting leads to persisting, a burgeoning grief. Allowing, surprisingly, lets it soften, losing strength until it becomes bearable. And so with that, what I would say is, if anybody would like to go to my website, carolbanens.com, there is a free Ease Your Grief Burst meditation. There are coping tips, a handout for coping tips. And also, if you are grieving, I know what that feels like. I know how hard it is. Reach out to me. Grief shouldn't be done alone, particularly grief of a suicide. let's have a call. Let me see how I can support you or where we can get the support that you need. But please don't ever feel you're alone. Grief can be very isolating, especially if you feel shame or blame or guilt. Let's pull away those layers for you so that you can start integrating your grief and start living life. Thank you, Jason.
This is the end of our broadcast for day 1 of our Set Free from PTSD Freedom Fight Expo. Join us for day 2.